It's been a tough year for the New York Jets, but there have been some bright spots. We're talking best and worst of 2023 today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, January 2nd, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangrenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, it is the final week of the season for the New York Jets. The last game of 2023 actually comes in 2024. It's Sunday at New England against the Patriots. This is the week where Jets players vote on their team awards. You'll hear later in the week, the Jets announced their team MVP for 2023. They have a couple other awards. They have one for community service. They have one for the rookie who acts like a pro. Today, I'm going to give out my own awards for the 2023 season. It's been a tough year for the Jets. Of course, we'll have some negative awards. We'll have the worst coach of the year. We'll have the least valuable player. The LVP always generates a lot of discussion, but I also want to recognize some great performances. So I'm going to begin with my team MVP for the year 2023. This really came down to two players. And these were the two players who were widely viewed as the two best players on the roster heading into the season. These were both first-team All-Pros last year. And for some reason, and I think I understand why in both cases, people view their 2023 as a little disappointing considering what they did in 2022. And of course, if you haven't figured out who these two players are, they are Quinnen Wiliams and Sauce Gardner. And I think that you can make a very strong case. These have been the two best players on the team this year, with all due respect to Garrett Wilson, who had 1,000 yards in a broken offense. I still got to look to Quinnen Wiliams and Sauce Gardner. And maybe part of it is just, I don't know if I can go with an offensive player for most valuable player, because the value for the Jets was mostly on the defensive side of the ball. And as I mentioned, I feel like there's this idea that Quinnen Wiliams and Sauce Gardner have both been a little disappointing this season. Now, in Quinnen Williams' case, I feel like that's because the sack numbers are down. You had double-digit sacks last year, not quite as many this year. But if you look, he's generated more pressures than he did a year ago. And pressures tend to be stable year to year. Sacks tend not to be. And that's particularly true at the defensive tackle position. Defensive tackle is a spot where, unless you're Aaron Donald or Chris Jones, you're probably not going to consistently put up double-digit sacks. You're dealing with much more traffic. If you're a great defensive tackle, you're going to get a lot of double teams. I see people talking about Quinnen Williams, and they're saying, well, the reason he doesn't have many sacks this year is he's dealing with a lot of double teams. Teams are scheming to take him away. That's technically true, but that's also part of the position. There's 5 offensive linemen. There are 4 pass rushers unless you blitz. So 5 versus 4, somebody's getting double teamed. And usually the guy that's getting double teamed is one of the interior guys, which is the spot Quinnen Williams plays. With that in mind, though, again, the pressures are even higher. And again, sacks are not consistent year to year. Pressures are. And a lot of whether pressures are converted into sacks comes down to the quarterback you're playing. Last year, Jets played a lot of backup quarterbacks. They were playing a lot of guys who didn't really know what they were doing in the pocket. So a good quarterback kind of understands he can't avoid pressure. Pressure really comes down to whether the defensive lineman beats the offensive lineman. But he can avoid sacks. He can step up in the pocket. He can move outside the pocket if need be. He can also get rid of the ball quickly. He can find his hot route, his check down, and get the ball out. Yeah, and that's this year. The Jets, I think, they haven't faced as many backup quarterbacks. So I'm going to attribute Quinnen's lower sack total to that to a large degree. But he's still getting a lot of pressures. And one of the things you'll find is that if a guy generates a lot of pressures, the sacks will follow. Sometimes you have a down year. Sometimes you just have a year where things don't click on the sack front. And the reverse is also true. If you generate a lot of sacks, but you don't generate a lot of pressures, your sack rate's probably going to go down the next year. A great example of that is Vic Beasley, this guy who played with Atlanta, and he led the NFL in sacks in 2016, but his pressure rate was very low. And it was pretty clear that the sack total was going to follow that. The sack rate follows the pressure rate, not the other way around. And lo and behold, Vic Beasley never really generated a lot of sacks ever again in his career. He had one year where it just kind of all clicked for him. But to sustain it, you have to be in the backfield a lot. If you're in the backfield a lot, you're going to get sacks. And Quinnen Williams continues to play really well. If you watch him on a play-to-play basis, if you're watching the film, I don't need to tell you, Quinnen Williams continues to dominate. And then you also have Sauce Gardner. Now, I think Sauce's issue is that he set the standard so impossibly high his rookie season that it's like if he ever gives up a completion or if he ever has a bad drive, much less a bad game, people are like, well, he's not that good this year. But he's playing great. If you compare him to other corners in the NFL, he's up there with anybody. I mean, he's allowed the third fewest coverage yards in the NFL of any corner who's played at least half his team snaps. The thing is, he's only missed one game. The only two guys who are higher than him have played less games than him. He's given up less receiving yards this year than he did last year when he won Rookie of the Year and he was a first team All-Pro. He's allowing fewer yards per cover snap than he did last year when he was Rookie of the Year and first team All-Pro. I think it's just like people's expectations are so through the roof for Sauce. Teams don't throw at him anymore. That happened his rookie season. I remember Darrelle Revis. It wasn't until year 4 where teams stopped throwing at him. It was 2010 where teams just finally gave up on that side of the field if they saw Revis there. With Sauce, it happened his first season. And Revis was a rookie in 2007. He was there in 2008. 2009 is the famous Revis season. And part of the reason it's so famous is that he covered the other team's number one receiver all the time, and teams still threw at him. That's one of the reasons Revis led the NFL in passes defensed in 2009 because teams did not figure out they needed to stop throwing at him till the next season. Sauce, it was year 1. In year 2 already has the respect where teams just don't go after him anymore. And this leads to the debate, should the Jets maybe have Sauce follow the other team's best receiver more consistently instead of just putting him on the left side most of the time? That's a debate we can have this offseason. I think that would actually be a very interesting show topic. But the bottom line is that Sauce Gardner is playing phenomenal football. He is a legitimate shutdown corner in a league where the rules essentially have taken most shutdown corners out of commission. I mean, I think if you can probably count the number of shutdown corners on one or two hands remaining in this league. And that's why Sauce is such a valuable weapon. And that's, to me, is what gives Sauce the edge. I'm going to go with Sauce Gardner slightly over Quinnen Williams. I feel like it's a coin toss. You could go either way. Both guys having excellent seasons, both guys having Pro Bowl caliber seasons, both guys still in the All-Pro mix. And for whatever reason, people, and I gave you the reasons, people a little disappointed. And I don't think it's completely fair, but I just think like everything is like set up to take Sauce Gardner away. And that's what makes him more valuable, is that there aren't many players like Quinnen Williams, but there are a lot of guys who are great defensive linemen. There are lots of great defensive tackles. And if you don't get quite, maybe you get like, I don't know, 80% of Quinnen Williams. You can get like 80%. You can't find another Sauce Gardner anywhere. So I'm going with Sauce as my team MVP this year. And I'd like to kind of raise awareness for how great Sauce Gardner's been, because he has been dominant this year. And I feel like people don't understand how great he's been. So let this be my declaration that Sauce Gardner is an amazing corner and has a phenomenal 2023 season. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to the coaching staff. This coaching staff is much maligned. So a lot of the criticism is fair, but there are a couple of guys who I think have done a really good job this season, and they kind of fly under the radar. So I'm going to give them a shout out as we continue on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. And I have just the game for you. Jets head to Foxborough in Week 18, their annual road game at New England against the Patriots. The Patriots are favored in this game. The Jets getting disrespected. And, Jets are probably a team that deserves to be disrespected. But the Patriots are 2.5-point favorites at home against the Jets. Over under this game is a very, very low 30.5. Probably fair given how bad these two offenses are. So that could be a game to bet. Again, $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 money line bet. And the app is easy to use. And there's so many different ways to bet, like using live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And if you're watching on YouTube, this will be the final day you see this background. I'm leaving San Diego today after a wonderful holiday with family. San Diego, one of my favorite cities. We won't see the normal background until Monday because I'm still doing a little bit more traveling as we wind through the holiday, as we wrap up the holidays. And today on Locked On Jets, we are focused on giving out some awards. And now we're going to move on to Jets Coach of the Year. And you might be saying, Jets Coach of the Year, is there any Jets coach who actually deserves a shout out? You're probably thinking Robert Saleh and Nathaniel Hackett when you say that. But yes, there are some Jets coaches who have done an excellent job. In fact, I think 2 of the 3 coordinators have done a really good job. Brant Boyer producing another excellent special teams unit, and Jeff Ulbrich doing a good job with the defense. Now, you may say, well, how much is Ulbrich really doing? It's Saleh's defense. People may say, this is a pretty simple scheme. Ulbrich doesn't do a whole lot with that. Well, I'll say, first of all, he's implemented the defense. Second of all, Saleh has said that he's turned a lot of the responsibilities over to Ulbrich. But here's the other point I'm going to make. 2 years ago, when the Jets had a horrible defense, everybody criticized Ulbrich. Ulbrich was the most criticized guy in the fan base. Now that the defense is good, you never hear a word about Jeff Ulbrich. So let's give Jeff Ulbrich a shout out. But my attention is going to focus on 2 position coaches when we talk about Jets Coach of the Year. Linebackers coach Mike Ruttenberg and defensive line coach Aaron Whitecotton. You never really hear much talk about these position coaches. You hear a lot about Calabrese, the quarterback's coach, when people criticize the position coaches. But how about 2 guys who have done a really good job? At the linebacker position, Quincy Wiliams has developed into a phenomenal player, a guy who should be going to the Pro Bowl this year, a guy who should merit all-pro consideration. And I remember back in the offseason when the Jets re-signed him, my response was kind of, whatever. Quincy Wiliams was okay. Made some big plays, whiffed on some big plays, played out of control. That was good and bad. He delivered a big hit, but he also run himself out of plays. The linebackers coach, and again, you may not have heard this name, Mike Ruttenberg, has worked with him and helped channel the aggression in a way where he still makes the big plays, but you see fewer bad plays. Quincy Williams has turned into an impact linebacker. And I would argue that's made C.J. Mosley better because C.J. Mosley, not a perfect fit for Robert Saleh's system. Robert Saleh likes mobile linebackers. Mosley came up in Baltimore. In Baltimore, it's more about playing physical. It's more about getting off blocks, more about delivering the big hit. And Mosley can kind of do that more. He can be more of a stay-at-home linebacker. Quincy can take the tough assignments in coverage. And you saw what happens when that doesn't happen. We saw what happened when CJ ends up with the tough assignments last week, Thursday Night Football in Cleveland, when he got matched up against David Njoku frequently. But Quincy Williams has really developed. And can we give the coach some credit there? We give the coaches enough grief when they don't play well. But so my honorable mention to Mike Ruttenberg. But my coach of the year for the Jets is Aaron Whitecotton, the defensive line coach. Look, the Jets have done a great job developing defensive linemen. I mean, Quinnen Williams was a good player when Robert Saleh came here. He's now a great player. And again, the coaching staff deserves credit. It's not just Saleh. It's not just Ulbrich. Give the position coaches some credit as well. But I'll go a step further. I mean, look at the young guys who have developed here. Young guys who, maybe were a little bit raw. Jermaine Johnson. This was Jermaine's make or break year. I said it all off season. I said it heading into the season. It had to happen this year. Jermaine was kind of old when the Jets drafted him. And when you get an old prospect, they don't have the luxury of 3 years to get it going. They're already like near their prime. So they don't, it's like it's now or never. It was a make or break year. For Jermaine Johnson. He's developed into a very good defensive end. And he's the type of guy who's not just a pass rusher. He can play the run. He's the type of guy who could stay on the field 3 downs if the Jets didn't rotate guys in and out consistently. And how about Bryce Huff? You know how I feel about Bryce Huff. Undrafted rookie in 2020. He's developed into a player. He's developed into a player the Jets need to keep. I don't know why there hasn't been more progress on contract extension talks. This is a guy you keep. I'm just going to lay it out there right now. This is a guy you keep. So Jets developing a lot of young defensive line talent. I give Aaron Whitecotton the credit. He's my Jets coach of the year. Now, let's move on to worst Jets coach of the year. Well, you know who that's going to be. Nathaniel Hackett. This hire was very uninspired. We know why they hired him. In big part because they wanted to get Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers had that relationship with him. I guess that worked, even though the whole situation really hasn't worked out for the Jets. You see the danger in doing something like this, though. Sometimes your best laid plans don't work out. And when Nathaniel Hackett had to start coaching, this offense had no shot. Now, I don't want to blame it all on Rodgers because, look, he and Robert Saleh worked together in Jacksonville, so I'm sure there was a connection there. Saleh's list of coordinator candidates last year was pretty uninspiring to begin with. And he picked the worst one of the group. So maybe Saleh should be my choice. But, I mean, I've never seen a less imaginative Jets offense than the one Nathaniel Hackett's run. How infrequently guys are schemed open. And I'm kind of glad that Zach Wilson got benched because people could see that it wasn't just – people wanted to put everything on Zach Wilson. It was not all Zach Wilson's fault. And once Tim Boyle went in there, who, by the way, was a guy Nathaniel Hackett and Aaron Rodgers handpicked, and blaming Hackett more than I'm blaming Rodgers for that. You saw how well Hackett's handpicked backup quarterback worked. Awful. Like, we can go on about Nathaniel Hackett. I'm sure I will in the offseason. Just dreadful work from Nathaniel Hackett this year. Jets' worst coach of the year. Rookie of the year is a tough one. Last year was a tough one for different reasons because we had 3 great ones. This year, you really haven't gotten a whole lot from the rookie class. I guess it has to be Joe Tippmann by default because Will McDonald hasn't really played a lot. The guys drafted after Tippmann haven't really played a lot. I mean, I guess Xavier Gibson's gotten some playing time when he won in that game with the punt return, but he hasn't done a whole lot. Jason Brownlee's getting some action, but, that's late season stuff. Joe Tippmann's really the only guy who's had a consequential role for the Jets this season. And, of course, it's been up and down, but I still have hopes for Tippmann. He's been thrown into a tough spot. He had to change positions on the fly. He hadn't really played a lot of guard in his career. Had to go in there early in the season when the Jets suffered some injuries up front. I thought he held up pretty well at guard, then had to move to center, which is a natural position. I don't think it's going quite as well at center, but he's had a lot of turmoil around him. Laken Tomlinson's been bad at left guard. Right guard's been a complete revolving door. It's been a complete mess all season for the Jets. So I still think Joe Tippmann's got a shot to be a really good player. I hope that he develops. I think another interesting show topic for the offseason, though, might be should Joe Tippmann play guard or center? I think there's actually a pretty good argument either way on that one. And it's one that I wasn't expecting. But I do think there's something to be said that Tippmann did play better at guard than he has at center so far, even though center is his natural position. And then you could go into the debate about whether or not center is more valuable than guard. We could get into positional value. But for now, I'm just going to give Tippmann my Jets Rookie of the Year because there's no other option. So congratulations to Joe Tippmann. Last year's third place finisher for Rookie of the Year probably would have won this year's in a runaway. But this year's Jets rookie class just did not make a big impact. And then breakout player of the year. This one's tough. I mean, you could go Huff, you could go Quincy. I think I got to go Quincy Williams, though. That guy's improved so much. And in that, Quincy Williams Quincy Williams got to be so mad because you want to have your career year the year before you sign a new contract. Quincy had his the year after he signed his contract. That's great for the team because the Jets now have one of the best linebacker contracts in football. They signed him to a very moderate deal this offseason, and he's blossomed into a star. So that was, Jets offseason, as I said yesterday, the Jets offseason was a disaster. That was the best move, was re-signing Quincy to the contract he got. Quincy Williams developing into a star. But ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to some of the negatives. We've talked about some of the good stuff, but it's been a bad season for the Jets. I'm going to give out my least valuable player award. It's going to be a very difficult debate. A couple of guys in the same position are in the mix for this one. And I'll tell you who they are as we continue on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you just pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And if you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Hill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. And you should know that PrizePicks offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. And PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with this injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100 using PrizePicks. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're giving out Jets awards. We've given out a lot of good awards. The only negative award I've given out so far is Worst Coach of the Year. Now we're going to move on to Least Valuable Player. And this always generates a lot of discussion. I remember a few years ago, I made a least valuable player pick. It was Alex Kessman, who was the kicker the Jets had in 2021 for one game, and he missed 2 extra points against the Eagles. And I got a few months later, somebody did a mailbag question, like really taking me to task for not picking Denzel Mims. So this is a very hot topic. And unfortunately, this year we have plenty of candidates for least valuable player, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. To be more specific, the wide receiver and offensive line positions. Dwayne Brown. I mean, the Jets, I can't get over that the Jets brought Dwayne Brown back at 38 years old, coming off a serious injury. And it made him their only option. I mean, one thing if he's being brought back as a backup, but they brought him back as their only option to be a starting left tackle out of training camp. And it went so well that Brown got injured. And when he came back, the Jets were decimated by injuries on the offensive line. And Brown could only get it in the game as a jumbo tight end. Mekhi Becton. I guess the one thing you could say for Becton is he stayed on the field this year for the most part, but it hasn't worked out. Almost at the top of the league for sacks and penalties. There's no way the Jets can bring Mekhi Becton back this offseason. But you also have to look to the wide receiver position. Allen Lazard, the latest in a long line of Jets free agent disappointments at the wide receiver position. Latest in the long line of Jets disappointments in free agency period. But, I look back on that and look at his career numbers in Green Bay. And this was playing with Aaron Rodgers. Sometimes sometimes if you have a great quarterback, you sign a guy from another team and say, you know what, our quarterback's really going to bring the best out of this guy. This guy played with Aaron Rodgers his whole career and was never very good. And has pretty much set every new career low this season and ended up being a healthy scratch late in the season. This contract is an albatross. He's going to be stuck with the Jets for another season. And normally Lazard would be your runaway winner of least valuable player, or at least the least valuable player at his position. But you have Randall Cobb also, who was brought in this offseason to play a major role, to be a starting receiver. Still irritates me. 4 catches all season long. We'll always have the touchdown against Houston. But here's the thing. The two of them may not even be the least valuable player at their own position, because you have Mecole Hardman, who was signed this offseason for reasons I still don't entirely understand. And this signing was praised for reasons I don't quite entirely understand, and ended up essentially never playing and then getting shipped off to Kansas City. So where do you go? I mean, these are 5 candidates who in most years would be, again, the runaway winner. Kind of like last year's rookie class. You had 3 guys who would be the runaway winner in most any other year. This year you have 5 guys who are legitimate least valuable player candidates. So who is it? Is it on the offensive line? Is it at the wide receiver position? My instinct is to go on the offensive line, because that, more than anything, has destroyed the Jets season. But I can't look away from these receivers. I mean, how must it feel to be Garrett Wilson, to be doing your job every week and look across and see these guys? Got to be rough. I ultimately decided, I went back and forth on this. I changed my mind consistently. I went with Mecole Hardman, though, for a couple of reasons. First of all, he didn't even make it to the end of the year with the team. Randall Cobb and Allen Lazard may be getting benched. Dwayne Brown may be benched. Mekhi Becton has stayed in the lineup. But at least these guys didn't get kicked off the team. Mecole Hardman, and maybe it's harsh to say he was kicked off the team, but the Jets dumped him. And the thing is, the Jets got nothing in return. The Jets literally just gave him away to Kansas City. They got zero value. I mean, it was a late round pick swap. There was nothing they got in return. So this guy really contributed nothing to this team. At least Randall Cobb, again, had that touchdown in December. Didn't do a whole heck of a lot else, but had that touchdown in December. Here's the other thing with Mecole Hardman. I don't want to go too far in saying there was logic behind the other decisions the Jets made, but you can at least kind of understand what they were thinking when they brought Brown and Becton back. I mean, I don't want to stretch that too far, because these were horrible decisions. But these are ones where I can at least maybe understand a little bit how they talk them. No, I can't understand how they talk themselves into it, but it's at least a clearer path than talking yourself into Mecole Hardman. And the same goes with Lazard and Cobb. At the time, we knew these were not good moves. But at least these guys had a history with Aaron Rodgers. At least you could say, you know what, chemistry matters between a quarterback and a receiver. Now, the fact that Cobb was, Cobb's best days are far behind him and he can't really contribute anymore, that should have been a red flag. The fact that Lazard never really produced with Aaron Rodgers that much, that should have been a red flag. But at least you could say, okay, we have a new quarterback. We're bringing in receivers we're familiar with. It's a horrible, it's very unconvincing, I admit. But at least it makes more sense than Mecole Hardman, who produced virtually nothing in Kansas City with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. So this guy does very little with the Chiefs, but he's going to come to the Jets and produce. For that reason, Mecole Hardman wins my least valuable player award of 2023. And it was hard. There were 5 legitimate candidates for this one. But Mecole Hardman, I think, is the guy who ultimately takes the award. But Sauce Gardner is still here. So that's the positive. And the positive for the Jets is that Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, these guys are going to be around for quite a while. And the Jets at least do, in a season that's been very difficult, the Jets do have a lot of talent entering their prime. Far fewer Mecole Hardmans, hopefully, going forward. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Hope you have a great Tuesday, everybody. Send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll have our weekly mailbag show.